A country that claims it can't be broken is now showing cracks in the very core of its economy. Behind the official spin and staged confidence from Moscow's leaders, a storm is forming, one that hits right at the heart of Russia's money flow. And here's the real problem. The government is quietly scrambling for cash, pulling every possible lever even while the economy is being crushed under the weight of war, sanctions, and growing frustration among its own people. This isn't some normal budget reshuffle. It's a desperate hunt for money that could trigger a chain reaction across the entire country. Russia has always relied heavily on taxes to fund its budget, but the 2024 numbers show just how dangerously tied it is to two big sources: the value-added tax, or VAT, and the mineral extraction tax, which is basically a tax on oil, gas, coal, and other natural resources. Together, those two taxes alone make up more than 70% of all government income. That means Russia's whole financial setup is balanced on people spending money and on digging resources out of the ground. When a country leans this hard on just a couple of things, even a small shock can rattle the whole system. But what happens when those very taxes are squeezed? When the government's solution isn't reform or new ideas, but simply pressing its citizens and companies harder? Over the past 5 years, Russia's reliance on VAT has only gotten bigger. Back in 2020, VAT made up 32% of revenue. By 2024, it had grown to 37%. At the same time, the mineral extraction tax went up from 28% to 34%. Meanwhile, corporate tax didn't rise. It fell, slipping from 12% in 2020 to just 11% in 2024. Other tax sources shrank even more, plunging from 28% to only 18%. This shows a real weakness. Russia isn't building new industries or spreading out its economy. Instead, it's doubling down on taxing oil, gas, coal, and everyday spending. And this is where the deeper problem lies. When a government leans this hard on taxing households and businesses for consumption, it ends up choking growth at the same time. In January 2025, Moscow took things even further by hiking corporate tax from 20% to 25%. On paper, that puts Russia in line with other major economies in the G20 like the UK, France, Spain, Turkey, and China. But the impact inside Russia is far more painful because the economy is already being squeezed by sanctions, money leaving the country, and the huge costs of keeping a war going. So, while it might look like just another country raising taxes, in Russia's case, it's a ticking time bomb for businesses. Companies now lose a quarter of their profits straight to the government. That means less money to work with, tighter budgets, slower growth, fewer jobs, and weaker competitiveness. Businesses that might have reinvested in expanding or pulled in foreign investors are instead handing over a bigger chunk of earnings to the Kremlin. The ripple effect is clear. Slower GDP growth, less innovation, and a long-term drag on the whole economy. And for outside investors, the signal couldn't be clearer. Russia isn't a safe or friendly place to put money anymore. The higher the tax burden, the less attractive Russian companies become for anyone thinking about long-term investment. But if the corporate tax hike was a heavy punch, the next move could be even worse. Russia is planning to raise VAT from 20% to 22% in the 2026 budget. That might sound tiny, just 2 percentage points, but in reality, it's huge because VAT doesn't just hit profits. It hits everything. It spreads through the entire supply chain, adding costs at every stage of production and distribution, making prices rise and suffocating businesses. And here's the kicker. When VAT goes up, it doesn't just touch corporations or the rich, it hits everyone. Every Russian will feel it, from the bread they buy to the clothes they wear. This increase would make Russia one of the most heavily taxed economies in the world in terms of VAT. At 22%, Russia would be at the top of the G20, tied with Italy. Compare that to Germany at 19%, India at 18%, Brazil at 17%, and Mexico at 16%. Even France, Turkey, and the UK stay at 20%. Meanwhile, China, South Korea, and Japan all keep VAT much lower. and in the United States, the official V8 rate is 0%. For Russian citizens already struggling with rising prices and shrinking spending power, the tax hike feels like salt rubbed into an open wound. For companies, it means every single thing they buy now costs more. While they can, in theory, reclaim some VAT later, the process can take months or even a year. That delay alone creates a cash flow nightmare. By the time products hit the shelves, the higher VAT has inflated prices. And that leads to only two possible outcomes. Either companies pass the cost on to customers, driving inflation even higher, or they eat the cost themselves, cutting into profits and slowing down expansion. Either way, the business climate gets worse. Some companies could even lose their ability to compete in international markets as their prices rise and exports become harder to sell. For everyday Russians, the VAT hike is devastating. Prices for almost everything go up, and their ruble buys less. Inflation is already above 8%, double the official target of 4%. Adding a higher VAT makes the problem worse. And inflation doesn't stop at higher prices. Workers demand higher wages to keep up, but businesses already under pressure can't easily pay more, which sparks a vicious cycle of rising wages and rising prices. This wage price spiral threatens to destabilize the labor market, leaving companies weaker and workers no better off. The very tool the Kremlin is using to raise more cash could end up fueling a full-blown inflation crisis. And this isn't just about numbers, it's about survival. By raising corporate taxes and VAT at the same time, the Kremlin is showing how desperate it really is. These aren't the policies of a government with strong, balanced revenue streams. They're the moves of a regime trying to plug holes in a sinking ship, keeping the war machine going while barely holding together a strained economy at home. Every ruble collected from these taxes isn't going to citizens. It's being funneled into the war effort, propaganda, and protecting elites from sanctions. But for the average Russian, the trade-off is brutal. Higher prices, smaller paychecks, fewer jobs, and a worse quality of life. There's another layer too. Russia's central bank has been pushed by the Kremlin to lower interest rates to encourage lending and spark growth. In theory, lower rates should help the economy. But here's the contradiction. Higher VAT pushes inflation up, while lower interest rates usually fuel even more inflation. The two policies are working against each other. The central bank is being forced into an impossible balancing act. Try to stimulate growth while also battling rising prices caused by government tax hikes. This tug-of-war risks shaking confidence in Russia's financial system itself. And all this is happening while Western sanctions cut Russia off from global finance and high-tech goods, choking the very industries that could have helped create a more balanced economy. With energy revenues unstable and limited, Moscow's only real option has been to tax its own people and businesses even harder. And that's the clearest sign yet that sanctions are working. The Russian state is running out of cash and the cracks are spreading. So what does this all mean for Russia's future? A slower, weaker economy. Companies scaling back, families cutting spending, inflation staying high, investments drying up, and underneath it all, growing anger from people watching their wages stay flat while their costs climb. Every rise in VAT or corporate tax isn't just a line on a budget, it's real pressure on everyday life. Eventually, that pressure has to be released. The so-called Russian cash crisis isn't some idea on paper. It's happening right now. The Kremlin's tax hikes show a government running low on options, forcing its people and businesses to carry the weight of war and sanctions. Higher corporate taxes mean slower growth and weaker businesses. Higher VAT means higher prices, weaker buying power, and more inflation. Together, they drag the economy down in a way no propaganda can hide. In the end, the Russian government is gambling with the lives of its own people, betting they'll put up with higher costs and fewer chances while Moscow keeps pouring money into its global ambitions. But history shows that when governments tax too much and deliver too little, backlash can be sudden and explosive. The cracks in Russia's financial system are no longer hidden. They're spreading fast. And the question isn't if this crisis will get worse, it's how quickly it will eat away at the very foundations of Russia's economy.